welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Raven, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We have with us the author of this book, Walking Through Walls, Phillip Smith. This is a really interesting, and I may say very, very funny book about Phillip's life as a child, primarily, and a teenager growing up in a very unusual home for the United States of America, and even more unusual for Miami in the 50s. Phillip himself is an artist of some renown with art exhibits in a number of different museums in New York and elsewhere. He also worked for GQ for many years as the managing editor.
Correct.
Managing editor, and has really a distinguished professional life on his own. And during the last number of years, reflecting on his own family of origin, he decided to pay homage to his father and mother, but especially his father, who was nothing short of an exceptional human being. And in fact, it probably would be best understood as he is another type of Edgar Cayce. And you don't run across that very often. Yet, in fact, in Phillip's own home, he did. And so today's show is going to be exploring, you could say, the nuances of what it was like to be growing up in that family and the kind of gifts that his father has left us all, a legacy that to this day are of great value, and we'll be looking at all of that. So Phillip, great to have you on the show.
I'm delighted, Mitch. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Good. Now, we had you on the radio show, A Better World Radio,
Right.
just a few short weeks ago, which was a complete delight.
Thank you.
I
had a great time.
So much fun. Yeah, me too. Because you have articulated your own family's experience, your experience in the family, so hilariously and yet touchingly. And first of all, just tell a little bit about what it was like to grow up in a family where your father went from being an interior designer among the elite of Miami and the Caribbean, including Cuba back then, to a hippie and a healer of actually very high renown.
Yeah, my father, we actually had you can't have a normal childhood with a father as an interior decorator, but
in the first place.
Yeah,
right.
But we did have a sort of normal life. My parents were sort of jet setters in the early days, and my father was always interested in philosophy. I actually found, when I was writing the book, I found a diary from 1925, and he was 21 at the time, and he was listing all the books he was reading, and they were on Buddhism, Hinduism, Christian Science, and these are books that there was no Barnes & Noble. He had to get from
esoteric sources.
Yeah, in London, or we'd write away from them. He'd wait months for them. But then in the 60s, suddenly one day he discovered he could talk to dead people and he could heal people. And it wasn't just laying on of hands. He started being able to actually diagnose people accurately, the size of the tumor, or when they got breast cancer, why they got breast cancer. And it became this obsession that took over my father and our family, and it really was extraordinary, because back in the 60s, it's not like there was no understanding of this in society. So I had a very schizophrenic childhood where I would be home watching these miracles, and then I'd go to school and I couldn't say anything. I mean, I didn't say what my father did, or I never invited friends over to the house.
Like it could have been that the girl, Sally, sitting next to you, her mother had, God forbid, lung cancer, and you probably may have felt like you had an answer, your father, who could go, well, yeah, that's nothing. It's like, a headache. And you couldn't say anything because of the stigma.
Well, the stigma, and also there was a real concern that he would get arrested for practicing medicine without a license. The FDA came after him. And even on my mother's side, the relatives there were highly skeptical, but when my grandmother got sick,
your mother's mother?
My mother's mother, and the doctors basically said that she had kidney cancer, and that they were going to operate, but they didn't think she could live. I went to my father.
That doesn't usually stop them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and this is a time before CAT scans and MRI, so they couldn't really accurately diagnose, or PET scans. But my father said,
The next thing you have to have is a dog scan. They've
yes,
got a cat scan, they've got a pet scan, but now they need a dog scan.
dog scan, that was coming. Dialysis over
George
something.
Carlin has been an inspiration to me, among others. So, excuse me.
That's okay. But anyway, he correctly, from Miami, she was here in New York, he diagnosed her and said, no, she does not have cancer, and here are the signs why, and the doctors are going to order tests, and once they cancel those tests, then you know I'm accurate. And then he told my aunt, you need to go and tell the doctors to release her. She needs antibiotics because she's dehydrated and she has a kidney infection. That was it. And my relatives didn't believe her, but they didn't want the mother to be operated on. And it turns out my father was correct, but my aunt went into the doctor when they were ordering more tests, and she said, you got it all wrong, doc. She's dehydrated and has a kidney infection. She needs antibiotics. And the doctor looked at her and said, where'd you get your medical degree? And she said, well, some psychic in Miami told me. That was the end of that relationship. My grandmother was shipped out of that hospital in 2 minutes, sent home, and she lived for quite some time after that. But yes, it is funny. And so, yes, the book is very humorous because, you're up against these, not very enlightened people a lot.
Exactly.
But my father, as charming and funny as it is to recount this, it was actually very difficult for him because he felt alone and he had a mission and he wanted to help people, and his help was constantly rebuffed, or he'd be taken down to the police station, or security guards would throw him out of the hospital, rough him up, and all he wanted to do was help people and teach people. And as I mentioned in the radio interview, he never charged for this. He felt this was a gift from God. And our jet-setting life, suddenly we went to kind of the poverty level, and we lived a very simple life while my father went and helped people.
But before that, as I was kind of summing it up, your father was an interior designer, which in a sense already kind of expresses some level of sensitivity and artistic values.
Right.
So even in the earlier forms of his life, he had that going, a certain kind of sensitivity.
Yeah, he painted, he was a photographer. He had incredible aesthetics. And when you get into the messages, my father would get up every morning and take dictation from his spirit guides, and they would talk about consciousness, or they would talk about how a patient of his, how he should heal them. But one of the things that they talked about was that they felt that he was a talisman maker back in Persia, which is how he developed this incredible sense of color, this sense of ritual, this sense of magic, and he was very sensitive to objects and their power, and which a good interior decorator should be.
Definitely.
So maybe there's more psychic interior decorators out there. We just don't know about it.
It's funny you say that because I interviewed some years ago, Phillip, an Indian woman from, I think, the Punjab region, and she had been an interior decorator in India, came to this country because she had had a major samadhi experience,
Right.
and was just emanating Shakti, chi, and you could feel it, basically.
Wonderful.
And she said that she still, after I did an interview with her, you could see me from the beginning of the interview to the end turn into a different person.
Wow.
You could see it. You go, what happened to Mitchell? It's just half an hour.
He got decorated.
And I actually, that's right. Well, she said, I'm still an interior designer, but I'm using other elements. I thought that was really good.
So she redid your interior.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
I was sort of high from that. I was in an altered state for days.
Wonderful.
Literally almost a week from that encounter. So I know of these things that your father was kind of engaged in to some extent. What you've mentioned that he got involved with particular kinds of almost like technologies, like the Tibetan mandalas toward the end of his life and things of that. Could you talk a little bit about the kinds of healing that he was engaged in?
Sure. As I said, he started out just laying on of hands, but for him, it wasn't specific enough, because for my father, the idea that he would just hold out his hand and blast someone with energy seemed very unscientific to him. He wanted to be empirical. He wanted to be scientific. He wanted to be measurable. And the part of what was behind that is he knew that the world saw him as being a lunatic, and he wasn't. He was just, this thing happened to him.
Oh, the world.
Yeah. And so what he wanted to do was quantify things as much as possible. And one of the things he wanted to do was be able to diagnose accurately. He wanted to be he wanted to be able to heal almost like targeted radiation or lasers, so that he could say, well, the tumor was this big and the doctors confirmed it, but now it's not there, and this is what I did. And he left copious notes and documents. So toward the end of his life,
Sounds like a very responsible healer.
very
That he had
responsible.
his right hemisphere was cooking, but so was his left.
Right. It was not very, loosey-goosey, so to speak. It was
Right.
very, he was
Yeah.
very, very
Exacting
practical about
and
this.
practical.
Even though when you talk about what he did, it sounds like he was totally nuts.
But that depends on one's point of view. 'Cause
That's correct.
If I heard it back then, I go, or my mother, and you and I had
Right.
a very fine conversation about that both of our mothers felt like they were living on a Hollywood set all the time.
Correct.
You
Correct.
know, they walked, that was very well put. And, from our point of view, it was like, certainly my mother's or mine, or my sister's, we've said, sure, why not?
Of course.
There's a level of which that makes perfect sense.
Yes. And to him and maybe a few others, a very small circle of people that did.
Right.
And now, 50 years, don't forget 50 years ago, 50 years now, everybody would have said, let's line up and go see Lou Smith. But he was, the spirits were basically evolving him. And at night, he said, I interviewed him toward the end of his life, and he said at night, they take me out to other dimensions, and there are laboratories, and they're teaching me these healing methods. And he would develop these weird things that, I've never seen since. One of them was these little colored cardboard squares called projectors. And he would basically imprint a psychic DNA into this cardboard square of a disease or an antidote to the disease. And he would take this little square and he would measure with a pendulum when someone came to him, and he'd say, oh, you need R36. And he would take that and he would leave it there for no more than 3 minutes because he felt people could overdose. And it was interesting, he would tape his classes. In one of the classes, he had people use a pendulum and pick out which projector they wanted. And one woman started hyperventilating. And he said, what's wrong? And she says, I don't know. And he took the projector off, and it was oxygen. And she had taken in too much oxygen. And he said, I told you, only leave this on for 3 minutes. You put this on like 5 minutes ago. So there was this incredible invisible energy in there that people actually felt. So that was one of his healing methods. And then, as you mentioned, there were these drawings that the spirits would dictate. They looked like mandalas, and they were numbered like R17. And the spirits would come to him in the middle of the night, and they would ask him they would tell him which one of these drawings to put on this board that had magnets and copper wire, and he would put them there to send out energy for a specific purpose. Now, it could be anything from a drought in the Everglades, and there needed to be water, or there was political insurrection in another country, and it could be destabilizing, or there were patients that needed to be healed. So he was healing the planet in the same way he would heal a body. To him, there was no difference.
Ooh, God Almighty. You and your father, me, I should say, have a lot in common. Because that's sort of like my life. I call it personal and planetary health. And show me where one ends and the other begins.
That's correct.
I can't see it.
No, that's absolutely correct.
Completely untrue. Which is the true definition of holistic.
Right.
But most holistic practitioners don't really think holistically. They think particularly. They say holistic, but they focus on what their mind is ready to focus on.
Right.
And can't get the larger gestalt, if you will.
Right.
It's just the way it is.
It's all connected.
Yeah. Most people don't get the unity field effect,
No.
if you will.
No.
But, this is phenomenal to hear. Now, Walking Through Walls is the name of the book, Philip.
Yes.
Yeah?
So what is the story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or is that just a random name?
No, nothing in the book is random. Everything, by the way, is verified. And when I turned the
I was
manuscript
kidding.
in, no, I brought in all my father's tapes, and not all of them, but a lot of them. And
You have reams of material that your father left.
Correct.
Audio tapes, written notes.
Yes.
That could
Diaries.
fill up 10 more books.
Yes, it's overwhelming.
It's fabulous.
It's
and
overwhelming.
Someday there will be someone or a group of people to come and classify it and categorize it and really detail it.
Good, because I'm doing it. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, right.
I'm glad people are coming to help me.
We are recruiting.
Walking Through Walls, it was a story that actually was buried later in the book, but we moved it up to the front. It's the opening chapter, and I'm 14 years old, and I'm coming home, and my father's car is in front of the house. The porch lights are on, and the house is dark, and I don't have my keys, so I'm knocking on the door, and there's no answer. I'm knocking, and this is a long time ago, so I don't have a cell phone, and I'm thinking I got to walk back, which is about a half hour away to where I came from, to call my father and say, Pop, I'm home. Can you open up? Anyway, the door does open, like in a black and white horror movie, and it just opens very slowly, like, and this guy who looked like Lurch steps forward and says, your father's in trance and can't be disturbed now. Oh, okay. And he starts to close the door, and he looks at me and says, why did you even bother to knock? He says, after all, you are your father's son. Haven't you learned to walk through walls yet? And the idea being that I was expected to levitate, become invisible, be abducted by aliens, all of those things because I was my father's son, and I was just trying to be a normal kid.
As you so well put it at one point or another, that growing up in your household was sort of like a combination of growing up in the Addams Family and Bewitched.
Yes.
You know?
And on that point, I mean, for me, I Dream of Jeannie, and all of those movies were reality shows, basically.
Oh, that's good. I like it. And so, what was it like to be, I know you said it felt schizophrenic, but just the deeper feeling, what was that like to be witness to this? Was it mainly awe? Was it mainly embarrassment? Because of who you were, which is not your father.
Right.
You had different directives in this life. You were 13 and 14 and 15. You know.
Yeah.
What was it? What was the feeling quality?
I think it was a very complex mixture. It wasn't easy. And I think any father-son relationship is never easy. And this was even more complicated. Basically, there was embarrassment, like, oh, God, my father's curing cancer again. He's such a boring fruitcake. There was that. And then there was... It's
so healthy to laugh about these things, you know. Oh, it's just cancer again, folks, you know.
It's like,
ho hum.
Yeah, exactly. It was. I'm gonna go in the living room in the kitchen and get some potato chips and ice cream, because I don't want any part of this. But on the other hand, I was emulating my father. I mean, I taught myself yoga by the time I was 12. I was fasting. I was interested in macrobiotics. So he
was a macrobiotic. In fact, that's how the whole thing kind of kicked off.
That's correct.
Was through his interest in macrobiotics.
Right. That was the door that opened, was him changing his diet. And once he entered that door, things sort of progressed almost as if he was on a correspondence school. And one teacher after another would basically appear until things really evolved.
Yeah. So brown rice, everybody. Yeah. That's it. You know, brown rice fast now.
Yeah, try and buy brown rice in Miami, Florida in 1968. It ain't easy, let me tell you.
Right.
You really had to hunt for it.
Yeah. So it was this complex of feeling embarrassed, of feeling this is all sort of unbelievable. You were incredulous and impressed, all sort of at the same time, and following in his footsteps to some extent. because it's magnetic.
Right. And also keep in mind that
And what about your mother also? I mean, you must have been feeling a bit torn between the two of you.
yeah, my mother basically
The therapist is coming out, excuse me.
no, I think I basically split my personality equally between them. But I think it was very tough on her. Not that she did not support him or was interested in what he was doing, but what he was doing turned our house into an emergency room. So that basically 3 o'clock in the morning, people are banging on the door, screaming, "You got to help me!" And we're asleep. It's like, what the hell is this? And today healers have office hours. There were no
Yeah.
such thing because he didn't believe that this was in an office. This was just, you need help, I'm here. The phone was ringing constantly, and it came to a point where my father moved into a guest house next door,
Oh, I
so
see.
that he could deal with his patients,
3 a.m. clients.
of which there were many.
God. Now, are there particular stories that you remember that were utterly awesome to you and really noteworthy of, be they cancers or MS or, what are considered intractable diseases?
Right. Well, there's a couple that on the website, which is walkingthroughwallsthebook.com. I try to make a museum of my father. So there are actually testimonial letters from people who healed on the website, and people can read those. And it was babies who couldn't hear, or babies who couldn't see, or a woman's sister had leukemia. But I was giving a lecture in Miami a couple weeks ago, and I was talking about the book. And this guy, a 50-year-old guy, stands up, and kind of a construction worker looking guy. And he said, "Wow, I can't believe I'm meeting you." And I said, "Oh, okay, nice to meet you." And he said when he was 17, he was in a car accident that basically the doctor said to his mother, "You better hope your son dies, because if he lives, you don't want your son to live." And he said, I am that son. And your mother knew my father, and the first thing she did was call your father, and he came to the hospital. And I am here, and he saved my life because your father. I mean, it was just, it was an astonishing, and I spoke to this guy the other day. He's a carpenter now, and it was just unbelievable. I mean, he stood up so slowly, and I thought, this is a little weird. And, you could tell that he wasn't exactly a yoga master. He wasn't that flexible, but he said, basically, the doctors were hoping that I died. And he said, here I am. So my father certainly did something. And my attitude is, even if he did that once in his life, that's more than most people do. But he did this every single day.
Exactly. The great old Jewish doctor Maimonides said, to save a life is to save the universe.
That's
so
correct.
Your father did that many a time. And what a feeling it must have been in the present to experience. When did your father pass?
81. So a long time ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of what he did, and one of the reasons I wrote the book is that I think he left behind, he was a pioneer and left this legacy, and I wanted more and more people basically to know about his life and his work, and to see that, well, there is this guy who helped start a lot of this stuff.
Exactly. Now, would you say that a lot of this body of material, Philip, is usable if people actually study it, that they could derive information that would be applicable in their lives, either for self-healing or as a practitioner to help others?
I think
or is it too particular?
I think it works on a lot of levels. I think there's some sort of broad level things about surrounding yourself with the white light of protection, or what my father would do is, if he ever had a problem, he'd say, he couldn't make a decision if he didn't use the pendulum, he'd say, is this for the highest good? And that answers a lot of questions right there. Should I cheat on my wife? I really like this woman. Is this for the highest good? Well, no, because you have kids and your wife's going to sue you and everything. So that's so there's that very general, easy level of day-to-day spiritual living. But then it gets very complex and very, very esoteric. And I think that at that point, the material needs to be I guess, translated for people. And I'm starting to do that. But boy, that's going to be a huge undertaking.
Well, you know, I use the image of Edgar Casey. In Edgar Casey's case, if you can say that,
Yes.
he left so many different kinds of remedies and healing tools that even though they were originally generated for particular clients of his,
Correct.
you know, you take castor oil, put it on
Right.
your liver, you know, it's actually very universally applicable in many, many instances, I should say.
Right.
So I'm wondering if your father's work, even though he was the one that was in dialogue with the spirit world and with other dimensions and who knows who, you know, working with the particular people who came in the door at 3 and 4 a.m. Still, I'm wondering if there's just some value if people were to actually study it, like with the Edgar Casey material, and use it in their own lives.
I think so. I mean, I met a woman recently who did study with my father, and I won't say
Really?
that she's a healer, but she said it has affected me, and now my daughter. Basically, we live a very spiritual, energetic life because of what we learned from your father. So I think there are life lessons there as well as healing lessons.
Exactly. Well, it's utterly, completely fascinating. If I were to ask more questions, if we had had more time, and I did ask you in an email, can your father kind of cultivate more time? So each minute would really secretly be 2, you know, something like that.
I'll ask him.
1 for the, you know, 2 for the price of 1. I would want to know more about his relationship with the spirit world, with the other dimensions, and what fields he was engaging in to get the download of information that was so amazingly accurate. But that'll have to be for another time.
Okay.
But give your website to everybody.
Yes, it's walkingthroughwalls.thebook.com. And like I said, it's a complete museum of my father. It shows his healing tools, his psychic dictation, testimonial letters, photographs, etc.
Thanks so much for really
Sure.
taking it on to
Well,
do this and come on to the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. This is Mitchell J. Rabin. Thanks so much for joining us. It's just illuminating to learn about the lives of people who have gone before us, who have led this kind of life, and there just aren't that many of them, but certainly enough to be a shining example for us. Get in touch with us at www.abetterworld.net. Send us your thoughts, your feelings, your comments about our show. Love to hear from you. And sign up for our newsletter there as well. So look forward to seeing you all next week.